Hi guys, and welcome to Calm Night Radio Channel. Tonight we step into the uneasy hush of an 1840 plantation night, where the cabins are dim, the air smells of ash and cornmeal, and hunger follows people as faithfully as their own shadows. You may think food is a simple thing, a plate, a pot, a loaf, but here it is a daily question, a quiet calculation, a test of endurance that never really ends. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you're here, comment below with your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, and let yourself walk slowly into the plantation yard, where the ground feels cool under bare feet, and the night breeze carries the smell of smoke, damp earth, and old wood. You move past rough cabins, their walls chinked with clay, their doorways glowing faintly with firelight. Somewhere nearby, a baby stirs, a tired voice hums, a pot lid clicks softly against iron. It is late, but the work of feeding a family is not finished. It is almost never finished. You are standing in a place where food means survival in the plainest sense. Not comfort, not pleasure. Survival. In 1840, many enslaved black Americans live on rations handed out by the people who claim ownership over their labor, their time, and their bodies. The food is usually cheap, heavy, and limited. Cornmeal is common. Salt pork appears often, though not always in generous amounts. Molasses, sweet potatoes, rice, or a little flour may come into the picture depending on the region. But no one here is opening a pantry with cheerful abundance. No one is saying, "Well, tonight let us see what sounds good." That would be a very different world. You can almost feel the weekly rhythm of ration day. It arrives with the weight of importance because the food given out must somehow last. A few pounds of cornmeal, maybe some bacon or salted pork, sometimes herring, sometimes nothing extra worth mentioning. Plantation records from the wider South often describe these distributions in cold, tidy terms, as if people were livestock on a chart. Historians broadly agree that many adult field hands received weekly cornmeal and pork in amounts meant to keep labour going, not to provide health or variety. Calories mattered to enslavers because labour mattered. Nutrition, dignity, and pleasure were luxuries they were rarely willing to support. So you watch as a family measures food with the care of jewellers. Cornmeal is not treated casually. It is watched, pinched, stretched. A woman with tired hands pours some into a bowl and keeps back a little more than you expect. She is already thinking about tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that too. This is how hunger changes the mind. It teaches arithmetic without numbers. It turns every handful into a decision. The cabin itself holds the scent of a long day. Smoke has seeped into the rafters. Sweat dried hours ago on skin and cotton. Wood crackles low in the hearth. The fire gives off more glow than heat now, but the ashes are still useful. An iron pot sits near the coals. A flat skillet leans against the brick. The air feels close, dusty, and warm around the fire, cooler by the doorway where the night slips in. You hear spoons scraping bowls. You hear someone sigh, not dramatically, just the tired sigh of a person whose body has been spent from sunrise onward. Meals here must satisfy more than appetite. They must push back weakness. They must help a person stand in the field tomorrow. They must help children sleep through hunger pangs. They must comfort elders whose teeth may not handle hard food well. And still, there is rarely enough to do all of that gracefully. So grace is replaced by ingenuity. Cornmeal becomes mush, pone, ash cake, hoe cake. It can be stirred with hot water, baked near embers, flattened on a hoe blade or skillet, cooked thick or thin depending on how far it must stretch. Pork, when there is pork, is used carefully. Fat is treasured. Grease can flavour a whole pot. A small scrap of meat can season food enough to make it feel richer than it is. That trick matters. It is not a trick for amusement. It is a trick for staying upright. You notice how little is wasted. A rind, a bone, a spoonful of drippings, a crust. All of it counts. Even the smell of cooking matters because smell can prepare the body for eating and, cruelly enough, can make a tiny meal seem larger for a brief hopeful moment. The scent of pork fat hitting a hot surface drifts through the cabin like a promise that cannot quite be kept. Still. People breathe it in. They lean toward it. They let it soften the edges of the day. There is a hard irony in plantation food. Some plantations produce wealth from rice, sugar, tobacco, or cotton. Yet the people whose labour creates that wealth often live on plain rations. You stand close enough to see the contradiction. Great fields stretch outward under moonlight, but inside the cabins supper may still be cornmeal and a little salted meat. The land is rich. The people forced to work it are kept on the edge of want. That is not an accident. It is part of the system. Owners and overseers often believed that a narrow ration was efficient. Too much food, in their thinking, cost money. Too little food, if carefully judged, still kept labour moving. It is bleak logic, very neat on paper, very ugly in real life. Hunger becomes another control. A person whose stomach is never secure is easier to pressure, easier to punish, easier to keep exhausted. Yet even within that cruel design, the people in these cabins build methods of endurance that deserve far more attention than plantation ledgers ever gave them. You see one of those methods in the simple act of timing. People learn when to eat more and when to hold back. A person working the heaviest labour may need the larger share tonight. A child may get the softer portion. An elder may receive broth or mush because chewing is hard. The distribution inside the cabin is its own private economy, shaped by love, duty, and need. No overseer is standing here arranging portions. This is the work of enslaved families making impossible choices with care. The food itself is often monotonous, and monotony can wear on the spirit as much as on the body. Day after day, the same textures return. Coarse meal, salty meat, thin gruel, sweetness only now and then. Fresh vegetables not guaranteed. Variety becomes a dream almost as vivid as fullness. Modern people talk about being tired of the leftovers after 2 days, which is adorable in a very sheltered way. Here, sameness is not a nuisance. It is the taste of confinement, yet the cooking is not lifeless. That part matters. Even with little, people create flavour where they can. Salt, smoke, heat, timing, texture, all are used with quiet expertise. An ash cake baked just right has a crust that resists the fingers before giving way. A pot cooked slowly enough can soften hard ingredients into something nourishing. A bit of rendered fat can transform a dull mouthful into one that briefly feels substantial. Survival cooking is still cooking. It carries skill, judgment, memory, and style. Some of that knowledge comes from African food traditions carried across the Atlantic under horrific circumstances, then reshaped in America under slavery. Corn was native to the Americas, but black cooks adapted to it with remarkable creativity, combining new ingredients with older habits of stewing, pounding, seasoning, and stretching staple foods. In some places, rice practices also reflected deep African knowledge, especially in the Low Country. Historians still debate the exact pathways by which certain cooking methods endured or changed, but there is no real doubt that enslaved people brought culinary intelligence with them and kept developing it under pressure. You can sense this intelligence in the way hands move without hesitation. Stir, pour, wait, turn, save that grease, keep that scrap, cover the pot, feed the child first. Nothing here is random. A recipe may never be written down, yet it lives firmly in practice. It lives in memory. It lives in the body. Outside, the plantation quiets, though it never becomes truly silent. Crickets pulse in the grass. A mule shifts in some dark enclosure. Wind brushes the trees with a soft, dry whisper. The stars above are cold and distant. Inside the cabin, someone scrapes the last of a bowl. Someone else folds a cloth over the remaining meal to guard it from pests until morning. You're reminded that limited food does not just shape dinner. It shapes the entire day. It shapes sleep, because a hungry stomach can ache in the night. It shapes waking, because dawn comes easier for no one when supper was small. It shapes tempers, patience, growth, health, and every private thought that circles around need. Children learn this early. You see it in the way they watch food. A child notices exactly how much is left. A child learns when asking for more is pointless. A child learns to eat slowly or quickly depending on the household pattern. Hunger educates with brutal efficiency. It teaches restraint, alertness, and disappointment before a child has words big enough to describe any of them. For adults, the challenge is not only physical, it is emotional. To prepare too little for people you love, night after night carries its own sorrow. To see a child still hungry, to know tomorrow's labour is coming, to count the days until another ration. This presses on the heart as much as the stomach. And still, people laugh sometimes. They tease. They sing low. They tell stories near the fire. Human warmth survives where abundance does not. That may be one of the most stubborn facts in history. There are also small details that do not always appear in grand accounts. A cracked wooden bowl passed from hand to hand. The pleasure of something warm after a cold rain. The way smoke clings to bread baked in embers. The rough grain of a bench under tired legs. The sting of salt on chapped fingers. The deep relief of swallowing even a simple mouthful after 14 hours of labour. These are not minor things when life is pared so close to necessity. They are the texture of existence. A quirky detail appears in a few recollections from the broader world of slavery and rural southern life. Some cakes or breads were baked directly in the ashes and then brushed off before eating. It sounds slightly alarming to modern ears, because today many people behave as if a breadcrumb on the counter is a public scandal. But ash baking was practical, quick, and effective. The fire was not decoration. It was an appliance, bakery, heater, and companion all at once. As the hour deepens, you understand something central. Limited food on plantations did not mean passive suffering alone. It meant constant adjustment, measuring, saving, reworking, watching, sharing, enduring. The rations were small because the system was cruel. The survival was possible because the people were resourceful. That distinction matters. It preserves agency without softening brutality. So you remain in the cabin a little longer, listening to the last movements of the night. A spoon settles. The fire shifts. Someone murmurs a prayer too quiet to catch fully. The smell of cornmeal still lingers, humble and stubborn. Hunger is here. So is skill. So is care. And in that dim room, with so little to work with, you begin to see the first shape of how survival was made, one careful meal at a time. You step out into the night air, and the plantation feels different once the labour bell is silent. The fields that looked endless in daylight now seem to fold into shadow, their edges softened by moonlight and mist. The packed dirt is cool beneath your feet. Dew settles on the grass. Somewhere a frog croaks from a ditch, and the smell of damp soil rises strong and dark, mixed with wood smoke drifting from the cabins. In this hour, when the overseer is less visible, and the day's forced routines loosen just enough, another landscape appears. It is smaller than the plantation map, smaller than the owner's grand claims, but it matters more to the people who live here. It is the garden. You would miss it at first if no one pointed it out. The patch is modest, irregular, tucked along a cabin wall, behind a fence line, or beside a rough path where the ground has been worked with patient hands. It is not ornamental. No one is planting for beauty alone, though there is beauty here all the same. Leaves catch the moon with a silver shine. Bean vines climb crooked stakes. Sweet potato runners creep low across the earth. A few onion tops stand thin and upright. Greens cluster in dark folds near the ground. The place looks humble, but humble things can keep people alive. On many plantations, enslaved people were sometimes allowed small plots to raise their own food, especially when owners wanted to reduce the cost of feeding them. The allowance was never generous in spirit. It was another calculation. If people could be pushed to produce part of their own subsistence, the enslaver could save money and still demand exhausting labour. Yet once a patch of land existed, however grudgingly granted, it became something more than a line item. It became a place of skill, memory, and guarded independence. You kneel near the rows and touch the soil. It is loose near the roots, crumbly and cool. You can feel where it has been hoed carefully, not in broad plantation sweeps, but in intimate strokes shaped by attention. These gardens are worked in stolen time, in slivers of morning, late evening, and Sunday hours when bodies are already tired. That changes the whole meaning of the place. Every hill of beans, every surviving cabbage, every sweet potato hidden underground comes from labour done after labour. It is effort layered on exhaustion. A woman bends with a basket over one arm and moves through the patch with sure hands. She pinches off mustard greens, then checks a row of peas. Her fingers know which leaves are ready and which need another day. Nothing is random. She's reading the garden the way another person might read a letter. Moisture, pests, timing, growth. All of it speaks, nearby. A child pulls at weeds, slower than she would like, but learning. The child's hands are small, the task is repetitive, and the night insects are annoying in a very determined southern way. Still, this is education. Not classroom education, of course. Something much older and more useful. The garden teaches patience first. Seeds disappear before they appear. Rain may help or ruin. Heat may coax life or scorch it flat. A chicken may sneak in and peck. A hog may root where it should not. Another person may steal from the plot if hunger presses hard enough. Historians disagree on how much autonomy these gardens offered across different regions, because plantation conditions varied widely. But many accounts show that when enslaved people had access to plots, those spaces could make the difference between constant near starvation and a slightly steadier life. You move farther down the row and smell crushed tomato leaves, sharp and green. Tomatoes do appear in some plantation gardens, though not everywhere. Squash is common in many places. Cowpeas, beans, collards, turnips, yams, and sweet potatoes often show up too. The exact mix depends on climate, soil, local custom, and what seed can be obtained. There is no grand, universal menu. A Georgia garden does not mirror a Virginia one perfectly. A coastal patch differs from an inland patch, but the principle remains. People plant what can endure, what can fill stomachs, what can be cooked into something useful with little waste. Sweet potatoes are especially precious because they offer substance. They keep well if stored properly. They can be roasted in embers, sliced into pots, mashed, or eaten plain. Their sweetness is modest but meaningful. In a life with a little sugar, even a natural sweetness can feel like relief. Greens matter for another reason. They bring freshness to diets otherwise heavy with meal and salted meat. The body knows the difference, even when the language of vitamins does not exist yet. A pot of greens does not simply taste better. It can help a person feel less worn down. The sounds around you are gentle but never empty. Crickets rasp steadily. A distant owl calls once, then again. Someone in another cabin laughs, low and brief. The garden itself has its own small noises. Leaves brush your sleeve. Dirt falls softly from a pulled onion. A basket creaks when shifted on a hip. You can hear breathing, the practical breathing of people busy with one more task before sleep. It is not romantic. That matters. The moonlight is lovely. Yes, but the work is real. Some gardens are carefully visible, accepted as part of plantation routine. Others are more discreet. There are stories from different places of patches hidden in less obvious corners, especially where restrictions were tight or where people feared losing what they grew. Not every hidden patch was secret in a dramatic sense. Sometimes it was simply sheltered, unnoticed, or protected by custom. But concealment could matter. Food drew attention. Anything valuable did. A ripe melon left in plain sight could vanish. A row of peas might be raided. The garden required defence not with speeches, but with vigilance. You notice how gardening joins knowledge from several worlds. African agricultural traditions travelled with enslaved people. Though often torn from their original context and forced into new environments, native crops such as corn, beans, squash, and sweet potatoes had long histories in the Americas. European kitchen gardening practices also shaped what was planted and how. The result was not neat or pure. It was blended, improvised, practical. People used what they knew, adapted what they found, and kept what worked. Historians continue to debate the exact degree to which particular planting techniques can be traced clearly to African regions. Because evidence is uneven, and cultural exchange was complex. Still, the practical intelligence in these gardens is unmistakable. There is also pride here. Though it lives quietly, a healthy row is satisfying. A successful harvest means more than extra calories. It means competence. It means that despite surveillance, restriction, and fatigue, you made something grow. In a world designed to strip people of control, the act of planting can carry a subtle emotional force. Not freedom, certainly not, but a small zone of decision. Plant here, thin there, save this seed, water now, pull later. Those choices are tiny, yet they are yours. Seed saving is one of the most careful arts in the garden. You watch a handful of dried pods being opened over a cloth. Seeds tap softly into the palm. Each one is small enough to lose easily and important enough to guard closely. A person planning for next season must think beyond tomorrow's hunger, which is no small feat. To save seed is to believe there will be another chance to plant. That belief itself is a form of stubbornness. Dry them well. Keep them safe from damp. Protect them from mice. Tuck them away. The future can fit in a pocket. Children absorb these lessons almost without ceremony. They learn by carrying water, shooing birds, shelling peas, and listening to adults mutter about weather. They learn which weeds pull easily after rain and which fight back. They learn that a row neglected for 2 days can look very different. They learn that gardens answer to time, and time on a plantation never belongs fully to the gardener. That tension shapes the whole enterprise. Crops need regular care. Enslaved people are denied regular time, so the work becomes urgent, compressed, and genius. A fringe detail from some parts of the South adds a curious note to this world. People sometimes used old containers, broken pots, gourds, or odd scraps as planting aids, carriers, or makeshift storage, because you use what exists when resources are scarce. Nothing about the garden demands elegance. A cracked vessel may still hold seed. A worn basket may survive another season. The modern instinct to replace everything at the first sign of wear would seem almost comical here. Objects are stretched like food. They too must survive. You walk to the edge of the patch where herbs grow in a narrow strip. Not every garden has them, but where they do appear, they matter. Sage, peppery cress, onions, garlic, or medicinal plants can transform cooking and comfort. A leaf crushed between fingers releases scent immediately, strong and clean in the wet air. Flavour is not a trivial luxury. It can coax appetite in sickness, brighten dull staples, settle a stomach, or make an ordinary pot feel more complete. Medicine and food often live close together in these spaces. One plant may season supper and soothe a cough. A root may be valued for both nourishment and remedy. The night deepens. A cloud moves across the moon, and the garden dims, then brightens again. Your skin feels the shift in temperature as the hour cools. The earth holds some warmth from the day, but the air touches your arms with a damp chill. Work does not stop because it is pleasant. Work stops when it must. A basket is nearly full now with greens, a few onions, and some small sweet potatoes dug from a mound with careful fingers. The potatoes emerge caked in dirt, heavy and secretive, like buried promises. You brush one clean with your thumb and feel its firm skin. This is tomorrow's meal, or part of it. That knowledge steadies the whole scene. Owners sometimes tolerated gardens, because they helped maintain the labour force. Sometimes they even encouraged them for that reason. But tolerance was not security. A plot could be moved, reduced, trampled, or neglected under pressure from larger plantation demands. Weather could undo months of effort. Theft could wound morale. Exhaustion could let weeds take hold. The garden was never an easy answer. It was a fragile one. Yet fragile things are not meaningless. Often they are the things people protect most fiercely. You sense how the patch also creates community. Advice travels between cabins. A woman with successful beans may trade seed or tips. Someone else knows how deep to plant turnips in this particular soil. Another person has a better way to keep insects off tender leaves. Knowledge circulates quietly, hand to hand, voice to voice. No formal meeting records it. No plantation ledger praises it. Still, it moves. And because it moves, people eat. The basket is lifted at last. Dirt clings under fingernails. Backs ache. Ankles are sore. The smell of fresh greens and turned earth rises close and rich. You take one more look at the little patch shining faintly in moonlight. It is not large enough to cancel hunger. It is not safe enough to guarantee comfort. It is not free from the power surrounding it. But it is alive. It is worked with intention. It yields food from ground that gives nothing automatically. And in that simple, demanding labour, you can see how survival on plantations was rooted not only in endurance, but in the patient tending of every possible scrap of life. You leave the cabin clearings and follow the soft margins of the plantation, where the neat order of fields begins to fray into brush, creek bank, and woods. Here the air changes. It smells greener, wetter, less worked over by plough and hoof. Pine needles soften the ground. Briars tug at your clothes. The moon slips in and out through branches, leaving silver patches on roots and fallen logs. Beyond the owner's chosen rows of cotton or corn, another pantry exists, though it never opens easily. You have to know where to look. You have to move quietly. You have to be patient. The plantation has borders, but hunger has no respect for them. When rations run thin and garden harvests are uncertain, the edges of the land become necessary. A ditch may hold fish, a swamp may hide turtles. The woods may offer rabbits, squirrels, persimmons, walnuts, berries, or wild greens. Enslaved black Americans often supplemented their food through hunting, fishing, trapping, and foraging whenever they could. Some owners tolerated parts of this because it helped keep people fed without costing them more money. Others restricted it sharply, especially when guns, dogs, or movement outside assigned areas were involved. The rules could shift with the mood of an overseer, the season, or the level of suspicion on a given plantation. You hear water before you see it. A narrow creek slips through the dark, its surface faintly gleaming where moonlight touches it. Frogs croak from the reeds. Insects trill from every side with the relentless confidence of creatures who have never worried about meal allowances. Mud presses cool and slick around your feet at the bank. The smell here is thick with algae, wet leaves, and something mineral and old. This creek is not grand, but it can feed people. Fishing does not always require elaborate gear. A line, a hook, a bit of bait, and enough quiet can go a long way. In some places, woven traps, baskets, or nets were used where available and practical. Children might catch small fish in shallows. Adults with experience knew where bigger fish lurked under roots or in deeper bends. Catfish, perch, bream, eels, and other local species could end up in a pot if luck and skill worked together. Historians generally agree that fishing was one of the more common ways enslaved people added protein to their diets, especially near rivers, creeks, and coastal areas. It did not solve everything, but even a few fish could transform a meal from mere filler into something sustaining. You crouch near the bank and imagine the stillness required. No splashing, no careless movement, just waiting, feeling the damp night settle on your shoulders while mosquitoes whine near your ears. It is a test of nerves as much as technique. A person working all day in fields does not have endless strength left for quiet midnight concentration. Yet there they are, doing it anyway, because hunger is persuasive in a way no speech can match. Farther along, the woods begin. The sound changes again. Water recedes. Leaves rustle under small unseen feet. A branch creaks somewhere overhead. The darkness feels deeper among the trunks, with a smell of bark, mushrooms, and leaf mould. Here is where hunting and trapping enter the picture. Not grand hunting with polished guns and fancy stories told afterward. Nothing like that. This is practical, careful, and often improvised. A snare set for rabbit. Trap placed where small game passes. A stick, a cord, a sharpened sense of habit. You learn the paths animals prefer. You read tracks in soft ground. You notice droppings, burrows, nibbled plants, bent grass. The woods talk if you know how to listen. Rabbits are valuable because they are common in many regions and can be trapped without a gun. Squirrels too, though they demand agility to catch and are not exactly going to wander politely into your hands. Possums appear in some accounts and memoirs, as do raccoons and birds. Turtles can be found in wetlands and streams. Their meat is not glamorous, but glamour is not the question. Nourishment is. A pot does not care whether the ingredient arrived with prestige. The risk is never absent. Moving through woods at odd hours can draw punishment if discovered. Setting traps on land claimed by the owner can be tolerated 1 week and forbidden the next. Some plantations limited access to firearms tightly, because weapons meant danger from the enslaver's point of view. Not only because of game laws, but because armed enslaved people threatened the whole structure of control. Historians still argue over how widespread gun use by enslaved hunters really was in different areas, since surviving records often mention only what owners noticed or chose to record. What is clearer is that people found ways to gather food with or without firearms, using local knowledge and persistence. You pause beside a patch of low shrubs heavy with berries in season. Not every berry is safe, and knowing the difference matters a great deal. Wild blackberries, dewberries, and other fruits could offer sweetness and calories during certain months. Persimmons might ripen later, their flesh turning soft and sugary after frost. Wild grapes, pawpaws, plums, and muscadines could appear depending on region. Nuts mattered too. Acorns needed careful processing to remove bitterness, but hickory nuts, walnuts, and pecans could be treasured finds. Foraging demands memory. You must know when things ripen, which trees bear reliably, which plants can be trusted, and where to return before someone else gets there first. The ground beneath you smells rich after a day of warmth. Your fingers brush fern, then briar, then the rough bark of a tree. A spider web catches your wrist like a fine thread. Somewhere close. Something darts through leaves with a crisp, sudden sound that snaps your attention toward it. That jump in the chest, that sharpened breathing, becomes part of the practice. The edges of the plantation keep feeding people, but they do not do it gently. Wild greens are another quiet treasure. Poke salad, dandelion, lamb's quarters, dock, watercress, and other edible plants appear in different landscapes. Some require proper preparation because nature, as always, contains a mischievous streak. Poke, for example, must be handled and cooked carefully when young. This is not guesswork territory. A mistake can sicken you. That is why inherited knowledge matters so much. People know what to cut, when to cut it, and how to cook it down into something safe and useful. A handful of greens gathered near a creek or fence line can brighten a pot and stretch a ration beautifully. You begin to understand that foraging is less like shopping and more like reading a living map. The ditch with good watercress, the tree that drops nuts in abundance, the patch where mushrooms sometimes appear after rain, though only certain mushrooms are worth trusting, the hidden place where muscadines can be found before birds strip them bare. A stranger might walk through and see only woods. A hungry, observant person sees possibilities. This knowledge often moves through families and communities. An older woman points out a useful plant. A man shows a child where rabbits run along a certain hedgerow. Someone explains which creek pools hold fish when water drops low in summer. These lessons are practical, but they also carry intimacy. They are ways of bringing another person into the local world, teaching them that even in a place ruled by coercion, the land has details that do not belong entirely to the master. There is a strange contrast here. Plantations try to impose order on the landscape. Fields are measured, labour is directed, crops are planned for profit, but the edges resist neatness. The woods keep secrets. The creek shifts course. Seasons rearrange abundance in unruly patterns. That unpredictability can be hard, of course, because it means food gathered this way is never guaranteed. Yet it also means the owner cannot fully command every edible thing. A fish does not care whose name is on a deed. A rabbit does not pause to consider plantation boundaries before crossing them. Nature is not moral, but it can be inconvenient for tyranny, which is satisfying in its own quiet way. A curious detail from southern rural life adds a small note of texture. Some people use simple fish poisons made from certain crushed plants in some parts of the world, but evidence for how commonly enslaved people in the American South used such methods is uncertain and uneven. Scholars debate these practices because documentation is patchy and often filtered through outsider observation. What is certain is that people used many clever methods suited to local waters, from traps to lines to opportunistic hand-catching when streams ran low. You come upon a trapline in your imagination now, not because you see it clearly at first, but because you notice small signs, a bent sapling, a bit of cord, a run through grass. Nothing dramatic. Hunger does not require drama. It requires results. A trapped rabbit or squirrel means meat for a stew. Bones can flavour broth. Skin may be useful too. When food is scarce, categories modern life keeps separate begin to collapse. Edible, useful, worth saving, worth drying, worth trading. All these decisions happen at once. The seasons shape everything. Summer offers berries, fish, and green growth. Autumn brings nuts, some fruit, perhaps better hunting. Winter narrows the landscape and makes every successful catch more valuable. Spring can be lean before gardens mature, though fresh greens return. This seasonal rhythm presses on plantation life alongside the crop calendar. A person may know exactly when the persimmons soften or when should run in certain rivers. Timing is power. Miss the season, and the chance is gone. You feel how the body would carry this knowledge even while tired. Eyes scan fence lines for birds. Ears catch the plop of fish in a pond. Hands notice tender shoots where others see weeds. The appetite trains attention. It turns the whole environment into a field of possibilities and warnings. What can be eaten? What can be trapped? What should be left alone? What must be gathered quickly before anyone sees? Not every act of supplementing food at the plantation edge was approved, and that matters too. Gathering from woods or waters could blur into what enslavers called theft, especially if livestock, stored provisions, or privately claimed resources were touched. Owners wrote complaints about stolen pigs, chickens, or produce with remarkable energy, as if missing food from people they kept half-fed were a mystery too puzzling to solve. But at the margins, strict legal categories often mattered less to the hungry than the immediate fact of need. Survival has a way of making moral lectures from the powerful sound rather hollow. The night is cooler now. Damp clings to your skin. You smell mud on your hands and the faint metallic scent of creek water. Somewhere behind you, the plantation sleeps in its own uneasy hierarchy. Ahead of you, in the brush and stream and trees, lies the other economy that helps keep bodies going. It is not stable. It is not safe. It is not sufficient by itself, but it is real. So you stand for a moment at the edge where field meets woods and listen to the whole place breathing. Insects, water, leaves, a distant dog, a small splash in the creek. Everything seems alive with motion and appetite. Here, people survive not only by accepting what is handed to them, but by reading the land with extraordinary care, taking fish from dark water, greens from wet banks, berries from thorny canes, and game from hidden runs. The plantation tries to dictate the terms of the life. The edges answer with possibility, uncertain and hard-won, but possibility all the same. You return to the hearth, because sooner or later almost everything gathered, traded, rationed, or grown must pass through the pot. The fire glows low and steady, breathing out warmth that settles on your face while the rest of the cabin stays cool in the corners. Smoke curls upward and clings to the rafters. The iron pot hangs dark and seasoned, its surface dulled by years of soot, grease, and use. It is heavy even when empty. When full, it becomes the centre of the room, the place where scraps are persuaded into supper. This is where skill reveals itself most clearly. Plenty can make almost anyone look competent. A loaded table hides a lot of mistakes. Scarcity does the opposite. Scarcity exposes whether you know how to build flavour, stretch texture, and draw nourishment from very little. Enslaved black Americans on plantations often had to do exactly that, night after night, with meagre ingredients and exhausted bodies. They turned cornmeal, peas, bones, wild greens, sweet potatoes, and bits of salted meat into meals that could keep a household going. The result was not fancy, but it was deeply intelligent. The pot asks for patience first. You cannot rush hard peas into tenderness. You cannot bully tough greens into softness with wishful thinking. You must give heat time to do its work, so the fire is managed carefully. Not a roaring blaze that wastes wood and scorches the bottom, but a steady heat from coals and small flames. Wood crackles, then settles. A child nudges a stick inward. Someone lifts the lid and a wave of steam rises, carrying scents of pork fat, onion, and earth. The smell is thick, salty, and comforting in a stubborn sort of way. You hear the sounds of pot cooking before you see much, the soft plunk of cut sweet potato pieces dropping into water, the scrape of a spoon against iron, a lid rattling as steam pushes underneath, a low simmer, almost a whisper, steady as breathing. These are domestic sounds, but there is nothing casual about them. Each one marks judgment. Too much water and the broth turns weak. Too little and things catch at the bottom. Add the greens too early and they lose themselves completely. Add them too late and they stay rough. Every ingredient has its moment. Cornmeal remains one of the most important foundations. It can be eaten on its own in many forms, but it also works with the pot in useful ways. A thin cornmeal mush can feed children or elders. A thicker stir can accompany beans or greens. Small dumplings or meal cakes may be cooked beside stews. In some households, cornmeal is added to stretch a dish, giving it body when meat is absent or scarce. Modern eaters often expect variety as a basic right, then complain if one ingredient appears twice in a week. Here, repetition is answered not with boredom alone, but with invention. Beans and peas are another quiet miracle when they are available. Cowpeas, field peas, or other legumes bring substance, and they have the good manners to stretch nicely in water. A small amount can feed several people when cooked slowly with a bit of fat or seasoning. Their smell while simmering is gentle and nutty, deepening as the pot thickens. A spoon dragged through them leaves a path for a moment before they settle back. You can feel the promise in that texture. Soft foods matter after a hard day, when jaws are tired and speed of eating matters less than fullness. Then there are the bones. Bones deserve respect in this kitchen. A modern person might glance at a stripped bone and think the useful part is gone. Not here, not even close. Bones carry marrow, bits of clinging meat, and flavour that deepens broth beautifully. Drop them into water with greens or peas and they do serious work. Salt pork rinds, smoked hocks, a ham bone if fortune smiles. Even scraps that look unimpressive become precious once the pot takes hold of them. Fat floats on top in small shining circles. The smell alone can make a plain cabin feel rich for an hour. You lean closer, and the steam dampens your skin. It smells of smoke, salt, and softened leaves. Greens collapse in the heat, first resisting, then yielding. Collards, turnip greens, mustard, cabbage, or gathered wild plants all behave a little differently, and an experienced cook notices. Some need more boiling to lose bitterness. Some keep a peppery edge. Some surrender quickly and seem almost too willing. Cooking them well means balancing tenderness with flavour. The liquor left in the pot after greens are cooked is valuable too. It holds salt, fat, and dissolved goodness. Throwing it away would be unthinkable. Texture matters as much as flavour. A meal that coats the stomach, that sits warmly and steadily, can do more for morale than one with brighter taste but little staying power. That is why thickened stews, mushes, and soft breads are so common. They fill, they comfort, they can be eaten quickly if time is short, or slowly if a person wants to make the experience last. An ash cake with a crisp edge and tender centre gives the mouth something to work at. A pot of peas and greens offers softness and moisture. Together they become more than the sum of their parts. The hands doing this work are never idle. Stir, taste, adjust, scrape, lift, cover, turn. A woman pinches salt between fingers, then pauses. Salt is not to be used foolishly. Too much now means less later. She adds a little, stirs, tastes again. Her face reveals nothing dramatic. This is not a theatrical kitchen full of delighted exclamations and silly apron flourishes. It is a serious place. Still, there is artistry in the restraint. Knowing when enough is its own kind of genius. A pot also allows ingredients of different status to meet. The priced scrap of meat, the ordinary handful of peas, the onion too small to serve alone, the bruised sweet potato, the wild greens from a ditch bank. Once they enter the same simmering water, they begin to cooperate. Flavours mingle, toughness softens. What looked meagre on the table becomes something cohesive in the bowl. This is one reason pot cooking is so important in conditions of scarcity. It is democratic in the best culinary sense. Everything contributes. There is history in that technique as well. Across West and Central Africa, one-pot cooking traditions long made use of grains, greens, legumes, to fish, meats, and seasonings in combinations suited to local environments. In the American South, enslaved cooks adapted those broad habits to available ingredients, colonial pressures, native crops, and the demands of plantation life. Historians do not agree neatly on every lineage of every dish, because food traditions blend, travel, and change in messy ways. But the continuity of method is hard to miss. Slow simmering, stretching staples, seasoning with small amounts of preserved meat, combining plant foods with broth. These are practices with deep roots and practical brilliance. Some dishes that later become staples of Southern cuisine are shaped in this world of necessity. Cornbread forms, pea dishes, greens cooked with pork, rice combinations in some regions, and thick stews all carry the fingerprints of enslaved labour and knowledge. It is one of history's more bitter jokes that foods born in hardship often get repackaged later as comforting heritage without full acknowledgement of the suffering that shaped them. The pot remembers more than the table sometimes admits. The cabin around you holds the whole atmosphere of making do. Firelight flickers on rough plank walls, shadows move across faces as people pass bowls and spoons. The floor feels dusty underfoot except near the hearth, where stray drops of water or broth have darkened the dirt. Someone tears a piece of bread and dips it. Someone blows on a spoonful before handing it to a child. The smell of cooked onions lingers sweeter now, softened by time. A little grease shines on the surface of the stew, catching the light like small coins. Nobody mistakes it for luxury, but nobody dismisses it either. There are clever details that speak to how much could be done with almost nothing. A bit of pepper, if it can be obtained, changes a whole pot. Sassafras leaves dried and ground. In places where people knew the practice could help thicken or flavour. A charred onion or browned scrap might deepen colour and taste. Even the order of cooking matters. Brown the fat first and the smell grows richer. Add greens to seasoned liquid rather than plain water and the result feels fuller. These are not random habits. They are solutions discovered through repetition. A quirky truth of older foodways is that people often judged a cook not by extravagance, but by what she could do with odds and ends. That standard makes excellent sense here. Anyone can seem impressive with a roast in a pantry. The true test is whether a near-empty basket can still produce a meal that satisfies. By that measure, many plantation cooks were masters. Children watching the pot absorb more than recipes. They learn timing by sight and sound. They learn what a proper simmer looks like. They learn that a spoon stood upright in thick mush tells you something useful. They learn to save drippings, keep ashes where they can be managed, and never leave a lid off longer than needed. Memory forms around these repeated actions. A grown person later reaching automatically for the right amount of meal or the right place near the fire is carrying childhood lessons in the muscles. Pot cooking also makes sharing easier. A single vessel can feed several people without fuss. Everyone receives some broth, some solids, some warmth. The portion may not be generous, but at least the meal can be divided with a rough fairness. In a world where resources are scarce, the ability to distribute food efficiently matters. A pot naturally creates a common centre. People gather around it not simply because it cooks, but because it organises the meal, and in a modest way, the household itself, even the leftovers, when there are leftovers, are treated with strategic care. A thickened stew tomorrow can be loosened with water and heated again. Cold ash cake can be warmed at the fire. Drippings can season the next dish. Nothing leaves the kitchen thoughtlessly. Waste belongs to richer people, or at least to more careless ones. The steam fades a little as bowls are filled. You feel the warmth of one in your hands, rough pottery heating your palms, the first spoonful tastes of salt, earth, smoke, and slow cooking. The greens are soft. The peas have given up their firmness. The broth is thin by luxurious standards, but deeply flavoured by the standards that matter here. This is not food designed to impress a guest. It is food designed to hold a body together, and that may be the greatest truth of the pot on the plantation hearth. It gathers whatever the week has offered: ration, garden produce, hunted scraps, foraged leaves, a little meal, one onion, a bone saved from 3 suppers ago, and turns them into something coherent, something warm, something shareable, something stronger than the separate pieces suggested at first glance. In the iron pot, scarcity is not erased, but it is answered with knowledge, patience, and a cook's steady refusal to let good ingredients, however few, go to waste. You watch the women of the plantation at the hour when the day should already be over, and you realise that hunger is managed not only by growing, gathering, or cooking, but by relentless planning. The cabin is dim except for the hearth. Smoke drifts in slow layers beneath the roof. A baby shifts against a shoulder, a wooden spoon taps once against a bowl. Outside, insects scrape at the dark and the night air smells of dust, ash, and cooling earth. Inside, another kind of labour continues, quieter than field work but no less demanding. This is the labour of making food last. An enslaved woman begins with what is on hand, which is often not much: cornmeal in a sack folded tight, a scrap of salt pork wrapped in cloth, greens from a garden patch, beans drying in a jar or pouch, perhaps some molasses if luck and region allow it. Perhaps not. She looks at all of it with the calm, exact gaze of someone who cannot afford bad guesses. The skill here is not merely cooking, it is forecasting. She must think ahead through hunger, weather, work schedules, illness, and the appetites of children who are growing faster than supplies. Much of plantation food history is written in records made by owners, overseers, or travellers. But those records rarely capture the true weight of domestic strategy. A ration handed out once a week is only the beginning of the story. Someone has to break it down, protect it, portion it, cook it, save part of it, and make sure it stretches across days that do not grow easier. In many households, women carried that burden. Their labour sat at the centre of survival, though it was often treated as ordinary simply because it was constant. You see one woman loosen the string on a meal sack and reach in with practised fingers. She does not scoop carelessly. She measures by feel, enough for tonight's ash cake, but not enough to threaten tomorrow's breakfast. She pinches a little meal between thumb and finger and lets it fall back softly. That tiny rain of grain carries a decision. Later, if children are especially hungry, she may thin mush with extra water. If labour has been harsher than usual, she may bake more bread now and risk the end of the week arriving leaner. Every choice is a trade. This kind of management requires attention to bodies as much as supplies. She knows who is weakest, who is growing, who returned from the fields trembling with fatigue, who needs softer food, who can wait. A coughing elder may get broth, a child may receive the sweetest piece of potato, a man expected back in the field before sunrise may need the heartiest portion tonight. There is no perfect fairness available, only careful judgment shaped by care and necessity. That judgment rests heavily on women because women often stand nearest the hearth, the storage place, and the emotional centre of the household. The work begins long before the pot is on the fire. Food must be kept from spoilage, theft, vermin, and simple carelessness. Salt pork has to be protected from rats. Meal must stay as dry as possible. Greens wilt quickly in heat, so timing matters. Beans need shelter from damp. Sweet potatoes should be stored where they will not rot at once. The cabin smells faintly of smoke, not only because of cooking, but because smoke itself helps preserve and protect. It drifts over hanging scraps and settling surfaces, becoming part of the practical atmosphere of the place. Preservation, in this context, is never an elegant hobby. It is a hard necessity: drying peas, hanging herbs, smoking bits of meat, saving drippings, storing seeds, guarding leftovers, All of it demands vigilance. Women often manage these tasks while also tending children, mending clothing, carrying water, and meeting whatever labour demands the plantation has already imposed during the day. Modern life praises multitasking, as if it were a chic skill for ambitious people with planners and coffee. Here it is simply the baseline for survival, minus the coffee and minus the pleasant delusion of being appreciated for it. You can hear the rhythm of this labour in ordinary sounds. The scrape of a knife trimming damaged leaves, the hollow rattle of dried peas poured into a pot, the creak of a bench as someone shifts a tired back, the wet slap of dough patted into shape, a baby fussing, then settling, a woman's low voice telling a child not to touch that. Not yet. Wait. Around these sounds hangs the smell of pork grease warming in iron, onions softening if onions are available, and old wood heated by the hearth. The whole cabin feels organised by female attention. One woman may not formally rule the household, because plantation systems were always threatening family structure, but she often acts as its daily manager. She knows what remains. She knows what can be borrowed. She knows whether the garden is close to giving more greens. She knows if somebody trapped a rabbit yesterday or if all hopes now rest on meal and peas. She may even know whose cabin has a little extra salt and whose has nothing left at all. Information like this matters. It allows quiet planning before scarcity turns desperate. The seasoning of food becomes another domain of female skill. You might think flavour would sink to the bottom of priorities when hunger is pressing, but flavour changes how people eat. A child is more likely to finish a bowl that tastes alive. A weary adult is comforted by something savoury and warm rather than dull and flat. A little onion, a pinch of pepper, a scrap of fat rendered carefully, a handful of herbs. These are not luxuries in the emotional life of a cabin. They are ways of preserving morale as much as appetite. Scholars often note that enslaved women played crucial roles in transmitting cooking traditions across generations. Though the exact lines of inheritance are difficult to map with precision, oral knowledge leaves lighter footprints in the archive than plantation account books. Historians still disagree about how much certain specific dishes can be traced to direct African continuities versus later Southern adaptation, yet few serious observers doubt that women were key carriers of technique, taste, and domestic memory. The hand that stirs the pot also teaches the next hand what to do. You see this teaching happen without ceremony. A girl is told to wash greens again because grit still hides in the folds. A boy is shown how to bank coal so the fire lasts. A child reaching too greedily into cooling bread is gently swatted away, then given a smaller piece with a look that is half sternness and half mercy. Lessons arrive woven into routine. Measure carefully, save the drippings, do not spill, cover the food, watch the flame, share properly. The wisdom of food management enters the next generation not through lectures, but through repetition. There is also the burden of making decisions under uncertainty. A woman may not know whether the next ration will be full or short. She may not know whether rain will ruin the garden patch, or whether a child will wake feverish and unable to eat solid food. She may not know whether someone in the household will be hired out, punished, sold, or sent away. These are brutal uncertainties, and they make food planning emotionally exhausting. To save something for later requires believing there will be a later in which it still matters. Women also navigate the subtle politics of exchange. They may borrow meal from a neighbour, trade a little garden produce, or swap cooking help for a share of meat. These negotiations are delicate because everyone is managing scarcity. A borrowed cup of meal is not trivial. It can represent trust, obligation, and future repayment. A woman with talent for managing such ties strengthens the whole household. Her knowledge is social as well as culinary. You notice how often her own hunger is deferred. She tastes while cooking, but tasting is not eating. She serves others first, watching portions with a mind that is always dividing. This is not universal in every case because human households vary, but the pattern is familiar enough to feel deeply true. Care often disguises itself as appetite postponed. A mother or grandmother makes sure the youngest have enough before she sits. She claims she is not very hungry. Sometimes that is a kindness. Sometimes it's a quiet lie told to make the numbers work. A small quirky detail from older kitchens helps reveal the thrift involved. Rendered fat might be saved in whatever container was available, a cup, a crock, even a cleaned shell or odd scrap vessel depending on what existed nearby. The point was never presentation. The point was use. Saved grease meant future flavour, future calories, future help for a dry skillet or a pot of greens. Nothing that useful was wasted because it looked humble. Humble was the standard condition of almost everything here. You watch a woman revive leftovers with skill that feels almost magical if you forget the suffering behind the need for it. Yesterday's cold mush can be sliced and fried. Stale bread can be softened. Thin broth can be enriched with greens or meal. Beans can be cooked down again until they seem new enough to welcome. This transformation is one of the great arts of scarcity. It resists the finality of emptiness. It says not yet. This can still feed us. The emotional texture of this work is complicated. There is pride in competence. There is tenderness in feeding others. There can even be moments of pleasure when a meal turns out well, or when a child eats with real satisfaction. But there is also strain. Women on plantations carried impossible expectations. They were expected to labour for enslavers, and then labour again for their families, all inside a system determined to extract as much as possible, while giving as little as possible. Their domestic skill should never be mistaken for ease. It was heroism under pressure, repeated daily until it looked ordinary. The fire burns lower. Someone adds another stick. The smell of baked meal and simmered greens settles into the room, warm and familiar. A woman wipes her hands on her skirt and glances toward the stored food once more before sitting. Even now she is calculating. How much remains? What can be stretched? Whether there is enough for morning? Her body is tired, but her mind stays on duty. And that may be the deepest truth in this cabin tonight. Survival is not only won in fields or woods or gardens, it is won in the steady female labour of portioning, preserving, seasoning, distributing, and worrying over every crumb. The women here make food last through skill, sacrifice, and relentless attention. They hold the household together with hands that smell of smoke, meal, greens, and hard work. Without that labour, hunger would arrive faster, harsher, and more often. With it, life is still difficult, but it remains possible. You sit inside the cabin at the slowest hour of evening, when the bowls are nearly empty and the room feels softer, quieter, and somehow more exposed. Firelight moves gently over rough walls. A baby breathes in small, sleepy bursts. An elder clears a throat that has carried dust and years. The smell of cooked greens and cornmeal still lingers, mixed with smoke, worn cloth, and the faint sourness of damp shoes drying near the hearth. In this close room, hunger is never private for long. It belongs to everyone, though not in equal ways. Children and elders feel scarcity differently from adults in their strongest working years. The youngest need food to grow, but they cannot always endure long waits, hard textures, or strict self-control. Elders may need softer meals, smaller bites, more time. A plantation ration issued with blunt efficiency does not account for such differences. It imagines labour units, not families. Yet inside the cabin, the needs of the very young and the very old must be met somehow. That is where shared hunger becomes a household practice, shaped by sacrifice as much as by appetite. You see a child watching the pot before it is even served. The child knows how much is there. Children learn that quickly in places of scarcity. Their eyes follow the spoon, the bread, the hand cutting a sweet potato in half. They notice whether a bowl is heaped or thin. They notice if an older brother gets more or if a grandmother is served first. Hunger sharpens attention with unpleasant efficiency. It teaches arithmetic without chalk, proportion without lessons, and disappointment without ceremony. A toddler fusses because waiting is unbearable at that age. The smell of supper makes the wait harder. The child reaches, then cries, then is soothed with a corner of bread or a sip of broth blown cool from a spoon. That small act carries enormous tenderness. A woman holds the child close, rocking just enough to quiet the squirming body. The child's hair smells faintly of smoke and outdoor dust. Tiny hands grip the fabric of her dress. Food in this room is never just nutrition. It is also comfort, timing, and peacekeeping. Older children live in a different relation to hunger. They can understand rules, But understanding does not fill the stomach. A boy may be told to eat slowly so the meal lasts in the mouth and in the mind. A girl may try to seem unbothered when given a smaller portion because younger siblings need more. Sometimes children sneak bites. Sometimes they do not. Sometimes they become astonishingly disciplined because the household depends on it. Other times they are children, which is to say hungry, impatient, hopeful, and not naturally built for noble self-denial. Growth itself makes food questions urgent. A child who works, runs, grows, and survives illness needs steady nourishment. Plantation rations rarely offered enough variety for that. Historians generally agree that enslaved children often suffered from nutritional strain, though the exact severity varied by plantation, region, age, and season. Signs of stunted growth, weakness, swollen bellies in some conditions, and vulnerability to disease appear in many accounts and later studies. The body records scarcity even when the archive is thin. You glance toward an elder seated near the hearth. The face is lined deeply, not with theatrical grandeur, but with the plain marks of years lived under labour and pressure. Hands rest on knees, knuckles enlarged, fingers stiff. Chewing may be difficult, digestion may be weaker. Hard bread or tough meat is less useful here than softened greens, porridge, beans, or broth. The household knows this without discussing it formally. A younger person breaks food into smaller pieces. Someone sets the bowl within easy reach. Someone else makes sure the seat is close enough to warmth, but not chokingly close to smoke. Elders often carry another sort of nourishment too. They carry memory. They know what plants soothe the stomach, which foods stretch best, which seasons produce the worst lean spells. Their voices may guide the household, even if their bodies can no longer contribute as the strongest workers do. That makes feeding them an act of respect as well as necessity. In a system that values people according to labour extracted, caring for an elder quietly rejects the plantation's logic. The elder is not fed because of output. The elder is fed because the elder belongs. You hear the sounds of shared hunger in these small adjustments. A spoon scraping the bottom to gather one more mouthful for a child. Bread being broken, not sliced, because division is done by hand and judgment. A whispered instruction to leave some for grandmother. A child asking, not for more exactly, but with a look. A pause before someone answers. Those pauses matter. They hold calculation, affection, and sadness all at once. Sometimes adults shield children from the full truth of scarcity as best they can. A mother may smile while handing over her own portion, as if she never wanted it much. An older sister may claim she already ate earlier. A grandparent may refuse seconds with practiced dignity. These are tiny domestic fictions, and they can be merciful. The child receives food without also receiving the whole burden of guilt, but the household still knows what has happened. Shared hunger often means someone else has quietly chosen less. At other times, there is no way to hide the shortage. Bowls are light, tempers thin, children cry from tiredness and want. An elder grows silent because silence asks for less. The cabin air feels heavier then, close with smoke and disappointment. Even the sounds from outside, crickets, a dog far off, night wind through boards, seem sharper against that hush. Scarcity has a sound. It is the sound of people trying not to reveal how worried they are. The sharing of food in these settings follows no perfect moral pattern. Households make difficult choices based on need, custom, affection, and immediate realities. A working adult may receive more because tomorrow's field labour will punish weakness brutally. A child may receive more because hunger is making sleep impossible. An elder may be favoured because illness has taken hold. The point is not that every family chose the same way. The point is that each meal demanded judgment under pressure. Scholars still debate how much can be generalised about plantation family food practices because direct testimony is uneven and often recorded later in life. Yet the broad reality is clear. Limited food forced intimate decisions every day. There are moments of grace within this hardness. An older woman crumbles soft bread into milk or broth for a little one. A boy saves half his roasted sweet potato and slides it silently toward his grandfather. A child gathers wild berries and brings them back. Stained fingers, proof of effort. A grandmother tells a story while shelling peas. distracting the youngest from hunger for a few precious minutes. Care appears not only in the final serving of food, but in all the little ways appetite is managed, softened, delayed, or shared. A quirky detail from older households survives in scattered memories. Children were sometimes sent to chew tough bits of food longer than adults wanted to bother with, not because childhood was magically easier, but because young jaws and endless patience can sometimes accomplish what worn elders' teeth cannot. It is such a practical, unsentimental arrangement that it almost feels funny for a second, until you remember why it mattered. In places of scarcity, even chewing becomes a household resource. The body language in the cabin tells its own story. Children lean forward when food appears, all alertness and hope. Elders conserve movement, saving effort where they can. A woman serving watches everyone's face. She can read hunger there with painful accuracy. Who is still hollow? Who is pretending not to be? Who is too tired to ask? Her eyes move quickly, gathering information, assigning portions, gauging peace. You begin to notice how hunger shapes affection itself. It makes tenderness more deliberate. To save the softest piece for someone is a statement. To share broth from your own bowl is a statement. To pretend fullness so that another may eat is a statement. These gestures do not erase deprivation, but they reveal the ethics of the cabin, a moral world alive beneath the plantation's brutality. People do not become less human under hunger. They often become more visibly human in the choices they make for one another. Children also absorb these ethics early. They learn when to wait, when to offer, when to stop asking, when to help carry food, and when to sit quietly while elders eat. They learn not only the fact of scarcity, but the manners of surviving it together. That can produce generosity, patience, and resilience. It can also produce anxiety, food guarding, quick eating, or deep fear of want. Human responses differ. A child who grows under uncertain meals may become careful for life, or restless, or fiercely protective of every crumb. Hunger leaves marks in personality as well as flesh. For elders, a limited food can carry humiliation if dependence grows. A person who once worked fiercely may now need a softer portion, a hand to steady the bowl, or extra time near the fire. Yet the household's care can ease that sting. A respectful word, a child listening closely to an old story, a granddaughter mashing food gently with a spoon. These acts restore dignity where the plantation system tries to strip it away. The elder may not eat much, but the meal says, "You remain among us. You remain ours." The fire has burned to a deeper red now. Shadows gather in the top corners of the cabin. The smell of supper fades into the room's old familiar smoke. One child has fallen asleep against an adult's knee. Another licks the last bit of meal from a thumb. The elder holds the warm bowl a little longer even after it is nearly empty, as if heat itself nourishes. In this stillness, you can feel how survival depends not simply on getting food, but on distributing want in ways a family can bear. And that is what shared hunger means here. It is not a noble slogan. It is the daily reality of children, elders, and adults balancing appetite against love, weakness against labour, fairness against necessity. The meal is small, but the care around it is immense. In a cabin where food is limited and every portion matters, survival rests partly on this quiet household mathematics, where each bowl carries not just supper, but judgment, memory, duty, and tenderness. You step beyond the doorway and into the restless little economy that lives around the plantation after the official work is done. The night air is warm and smells of dust, wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of crushed grass. Somewhere a mule stamps in its stall. A lantern glows near a path, and then disappears as someone shields it with a hand. Voices travel softly between cabins, not loud enough to invite trouble, but alive with purpose. Hunger has already taught everyone the value of food. Now you see how it also teaches the value of exchange. A ration alone is often not enough. A garden may help, but gardens fail. Seasons shift, and not every household has the same luck. One cabin may have plenty of greens and no salt. Another may have cornmeal but no fresh vegetables. Someone may have caught fish. Someone else may have a few onions, a little molasses, or a scrap of smoked meat saved carefully in cloth. In these conditions, survival often depends on movement, not just of people and goods, but of trust. Food circulates through borrowing, trading, lending, bartering, gifting, and quiet selling, all in ways the plantation owner does not fully control. You watch a woman carry a small covered bowl across the yard. The bowl is not large, yet it matters enough for her to hold it steady with both hands. She steps around a puddle, nods once to someone near a fence, and taps lightly at another cabin door. Inside, there is a hushed exchange, a spoonful of lard for a handful of meal, greens for salt, a promise of repayment after next ration day. No receipts, no signatures, just memory. In places of scarcity, memory becomes a ledger. This informal economy is built on reputation. People remember who returns what they borrow and who pretends to forget. They know who shares when they can and who hoards foolishly. They know which household is reliable in hard weeks and which one has troubles too deep to spare much at all. These judgments are practical, but they are also social. To borrow from a neighbour is not merely to solve tonight's supper. It creates obligation. It ties cabins together in a web of small debts and favours, and that web can be as nourishing as the food itself. Borrowing is often the first resort because it preserves dignity better than begging. A woman does not say she has nothing. She says she will repay on Saturday or after the next garden picking. A man asks for a pinch of salt, not as charity, but as a temporary bridge. This language matters. It lets people maintain standing while still admitting need. The plantation offers very little that feels stable or honourable. A person will protect what dignity remains with remarkable care. Trading can be more direct. You have peas, I have sweet potatoes, you have fish, I've rendered grease, you have needlework or a mending skill. I can offer bread or help in the garden. Not every exchange is food for food. Labour itself can enter the market. A woman may cook for another household in return for ingredients. Someone good at trapping may exchange game for meal. A person with access to herbs or medicines may receive produce or other assistance. The economy is flexible because it has to be. Strict systems belong to wealthy people with shelves full of options. The poor trade in what they actually possess. There were also markets, formal and informal, where enslaved people in some places sold or swapped goods they had grown, caught, made, or raised in their limited spare time. The exact opportunities varied widely by region, plantation policy, and local custom. In some towns and on some estates, Sunday markets or evening exchanges developed where produce, poultry, eggs, baskets, herbs, cooked food, and small crafts moved from hand to hand. In other places, restrictions were much tighter. Historians agree that these markets existed and could matter greatly, but they debate how much freedom they truly represented, since all of it remained constrained by slavery's larger violence. Still, the fact remains, enslaved people found ways to create economic activity in the cracks of an oppressive system. You can almost smell such a gathering before you picture it clearly. Fresh onions sharp in the air, sweet potatoes earthy and warm from handling, fish with their clean river smell, molasses sticky on the rim of a small container, smoke from cooked food rising above it all. The sounds would be low and fast, questions, offers, jokes, caution, who has eggs, who needs meal, who can be trusted, who may be watched. Market talk is practical, but it also carries excitement because exchange creates possibility. A person arrives with one thing and leaves with another more useful. That can feel almost magical when resources are thin. Some of this movement happens with the owner's knowledge. Some of it happens despite him. Owners sometimes permitted certain trading because it reduced the burden of provisioning and kept the labour force marginally more self-sustaining. Yet permission never meant equality. A tolerated exchange could become forbidden if an overseer grew suspicious or a master decided too much independence was forming. The rules could be maddeningly inconsistent. Trade today, punishment tomorrow. What counts as enterprise in one mood becomes insolence in another. Then there is the quieter side of the economy, the one that slips through darkness. A chicken egg exchanged at dusk, a sweet potato tucked into an apron and carried across the yard. A little meal borrowed after everyone else has settled. A smoked fish passed through a half-open door with almost no words at all. These are not dramatic secret operations with coded lanterns and theatrical whispers. They are simply the practical movements of people who know that survival often depends on not announcing every transaction. A more complicated and morally tangled part of plantation exchange involves what owners called theft. Enslaved people sometimes took food from plantation stores, smokehouses, fields, dairies, or livestock pens. The word theft sounds neat and legal on the page, but neatness becomes difficult when the people taking food are the same people being denied enough to eat. Historians and descendants have long wrestled with this question, and many see such acts not as ordinary criminality, but as reclamation, necessity, or resistance. If a person labours to produce abundance while being kept hungry, the moral balance looks very different from the owner's account book. You do not need to romanticize it to understand it. Taking food is risky. It can invite punishment. It can stir conflict if blame falls on the wrong person. It can also be indispensable. A few ears of corn, a chicken, a bit of molasses, some milk, a ham shaving. These things might bridge a desperate week. The danger itself reveals how much those items matter. No one risks pain for trifles. Women often played central roles in this exchange culture because they managed household needs and knew exactly what was lacking. Men too might trap, fish, carry, barter, or bring in outside goods if hired out or moving through broader local networks. Children could participate as messengers, gatherers, and observers, learning early who traded fairly and who did not. An older child sent with a bowl to borrow meal was doing more than an errand. The child was entering the moral and practical fabric of the community. There is a strange elegance to how precise these exchanges can be. Not a sack of potatoes, but 3. Not a full slab of meat, but enough drippings for 2 meals. Not broad generosity, but measured reciprocity. Smallness does not make the exchange less meaningful. It often makes it more exact. In modern life, people throw around the phrase community support with cheerful vagueness, and perhaps a baked good in a decorative tin. Here, community support may mean half a cup of peas handed over when your own store's not much better. That is a different scale of virtue. A quirky detail from 19th century rural markets adds colour to the scene. Eggs were often treated almost like little units of currency because they were portable, useful, and easy to value. A few eggs could be traded for something urgently needed, especially where cash was scarce. It is oddly charming until you realise how much economic intelligence can be packed into a basket, carried by someone with almost no legal rights at all. The emotional stakes of exchange are high because food borrowing and trading reveal vulnerability. To ask is to admit lack. To refuse is sometimes necessary and sometimes shameful. To give is generous, but also risky if your own household is close to empty. These tensions create a social world full of delicate balances. That is why tone matters so much. A request may come with humour to soften embarrassment. A lender may answer casually to avoid making the borrower feel small. Dignity is protected not only by what is given, but by how the exchange is handled. The setting itself shapes the feeling. Night transactions carry the hum of insects and the protection of shadow. Sunday exchanges might unfold in brighter air with more open chatter. Cabin door trades happen in smoke-scented closeness. A meeting near a fence line feels more exposed, with moonlight on the ground and every distant sound making people glance up. Even food changes emotional temperature depending on where it is exchanged. A fish handed over secretly at midnight feels different from a basket of greens traded openly after church. You begin to see that these exchanges do more than fill stomachs. They create networks of information. Who is ill? Whose garden failed? Which overseer is watching closely? Who found wild plums by the creek? Who heard of market opportunities nearby? Goods move, but so do warnings and news. The food economy becomes an information economy at the same time. That makes it powerful. Some exchanges even allowed tiny accumulations of money or goods, though never in ways secure from seizure or restriction. A skilled gardener, fisher, basket maker, or poultry raiser might earn a little from surplus. Such earnings were fragile and never fully safe under slavery, yet they could buy salt, cloth, tobacco, tools, or food. Scholars still argue over how much these small earnings offered genuine leverage. but few would deny that they expanded options, and options matter enormously when life is otherwise narrowed by force. The yard grows quieter as the hour deepens, doors close. One last pair of footsteps crosses the dirt. The smell of warm food fades into old smoke and night dew. Somewhere nearby, a woman counts what she has managed to gather from trading and decides tomorrow can be faced after all. Somewhere else, a borrowed bowl waits to be returned with repayment when fortune shifts. None of it is grand, none of it is secure, yet all of it is essential, and that is the hidden strength of this plantation economy from below. It works in cups, handfuls, favours, promises, stealth, memory, and mutual need. It moves through women's hands, children's errands, men's catches, neighbours' trust, and the quiet daring of people who refuse to let official rations be the final word on whether they eat. In the spaces between cabins and under the cover of ordinary night, survival becomes something shared, negotiated, and passed along from one household to another. You step into a different mood now, one that arrives only occasionally and never lasts as long as anyone wishes. The plantation air still carries its usual smells of smoke, dirt, sweat, and pine. But tonight there is something else moving through it, meat roasting somewhere, sweetness warming in a pot, more voices than usual, a low current of anticipation. After so many ordinary meals of caution and calculation, there are rare moments when food gathers people in a fuller way, when the table, or whatever stands in for a table, offers not abundance exactly, but relief. These moments come on special days, after harvests, on holidays, at religious meetings, during corn shuckings, after weddings, at clandestine gatherings, or in the uneven spaces where the plantation routine loosens slightly. They are not universal, and they are never guaranteed. Some owners permit extra rations at Christmas. Some provide more food at hog-killing time or after major agricultural labour. Some allow gatherings for practical reasons, others out of custom, and some refuse generosity almost as a personality trait. Conditions vary sharply. Historians agree that occasional feast days or better-fed moments did exist on many plantations, but they also caution that these should not be mistaken for lasting comfort. A rare full bowl does not cancel a year of careful hunger. Still, the difference is real when it comes. You can feel it before you fully see it. People move with a touch more energy, a child runs instead of trudging. Women near the fire speak a little louder because the pot is less anxious tonight. The smell of meat is unmistakable, rich and fatty, drifting across the yard like a rumour everyone hopes is true. A kettle bubbles with something sweet. Someone has greens in abundance. Someone else has cake or pudding in mind, if enough flour or molasses can be found. The whole place seems to inhale. Christmas was one of the most noted times for extra food on many plantations, though experiences differed widely. Some enslavers distributed pork, flour, whiskey, molasses, or special allowances, partly to perform a shallow kind of paternalism and partly to stabilise the system through controlled gestures of generosity. It was cruelty in holiday clothes. Really, even so, the food mattered to those receiving it. To reject the owner's motives does not mean denying the importance of a better meal to people who had so few of them. Relief can arrive through compromised channels and still be relief. You hear laughter as a pan is set down. Not constant laughter, not careless hilarity, but something brighter than usual. Meat sizzles, a spoon scrapes the side of a kettle where syrup thickens, hot corn cakes release a toasty smell into the night. The sound of many voices creates a kind of shelter, especially when mixed with clapping, humming, or a low song rising from somewhere near the edge of the group. Food and sound belong together here. A feast is not only tasted, it is heard. There are practical reasons why communal meals feel so powerful. Quantity changes behaviour. When there is enough for seconds, even a little enough, shoulders loosen. People do not stare at the pot with the same painful calculation. A child can eat without being watched so closely. A woman serving can breathe between ladles. The whole emotional geometry of the meal shifts. Hunger is still present in memory and in the body, but for an hour it retreats slightly, allowing conversation, teasing, singing, and storytelling to move forward. Religious gatherings deepen this feeling in another direction. In the hush of a prayer meeting, a brush arbor service, or an evening of shared devotion, food may become part of fellowship rather than mere fuel. A piece of bread passed along, a pot shared after worship, sweet potatoes roasted in embers while people pray and sing softly into the night. These settings offer spiritual nourishment. Yes, but also material pause. Food in community tastes different from food in fear. Even plain ingredients become gentler when eaten among people who speak hope aloud. The smell of these gatherings can be deeply specific. Roasted meat with smoke caught in the fat, sweet potatoes splitting at the skin and leaking caramelized sweetness into ashes, molasses warming dark and sticky, greens cooked with more seasoning than usual because there is actually enough to justify generosity, maybe even ginger, nutmeg, or other spices in rare and precious cases, though such things are far from everyday realities. The nose notices abundance before the tongue does. The body notices safety before the mind dares to trust it. Food at such times can also be highly symbolic. The biggest piece may go to an elder. A wedding table, however humble, marks a bond the plantation does not truly honour. A holiday cake, even small and plain, says this day is not like other days. A shared pig killing or harvest meal turns labour into communal reward, at least briefly. People who live under constant extraction do not stop understanding ceremony. In fact, ceremony may matter more, because it marks time that the system would otherwise flatten into endless work. A fringe but fascinating detail appears in descriptions of rural southern gatherings from the wider world around slavery. Molasses candy, or simple sugar pull treats when sweeteners were available, could sometimes amuse children and adults alike. The idea of a little sticky sweetness stretched by hand under cold air is almost playful. It feels startling in this setting, and that is precisely why it matters. Pleasure survives in tiny forms. It does not ask permission from history's darkness. You notice clothing too. Not because anyone is grandly dressed, but because people may be a bit cleaner, a bit more deliberate, on special evenings. A headscarf tied carefully, a shirt brushed off, shoes repaired as best they can be. These details join the meal in creating atmosphere. A feast is made from more than ingredients. It is made from preparation, from intention, from saying in every available language that this occasion is set apart. Yet even in these better moments, the structure of slavery remains nearby. An owner may be watching. The extra ration may come as a tool of control. The holiday may end abruptly. A gathering may be cut short or monitored. Historians continue to debate how much enslaved celebrations functioned as relief valves that helped sustain the plantation order versus acts of cultural persistence that created spaces of autonomy. The answer is probably both, depending on the time and place. Oppression can permit a festival for its own reasons, while the oppressed fill that festival with meanings the oppressor never fully commands. That's especially true in spiritual settings. A prayer meeting under trees, a gathering in a cabin, a song moving slowly through a room, all can transform food from mere distribution into fellowship. The bread shared there is touched by theology, by longing, by communal memory. The sweet potato roasted and passed from hand to hand is not just starch. It is part of being together, and togetherness itself nourishes. It strengthens the spirit, steadies grief, and gives people a reason to imagine life beyond the next ration. Children seem different at such gatherings. They hover near the food with delight rather than tension. Their eyes widen at the unusual sight of plenty, even modest plenty. They laugh more easily. They ask questions. They lick syrup from fingers. They may still be corrected sharply if they overreach, because resources remain limited, but the mood around them softens. A child who usually learns restraint now gets to feel surprise. That emotional change matters. Memory is built from these rare bright disruptions. Elders too may come alive in a feast setting, with fuller food, warmth, company, and song. They speak more, tell stories longer, and occupy the centre with a dignity ordinary workdays do not always permit. An elder recalling old seasons, old people, old ways of cooking becomes a living archive by the fire. Younger listeners lean in, meat is carved, bread is passed, a story unfolds. History itself is fed in such moments. You hear clapping now. Perhaps from a ring shout somewhere beyond the immediate meal, perhaps from a rhythmic song rising after supper. Feet tap the packed ground, hands answer hands. The sound is low but powerful, carrying through the night with a pulse that feels older than the plantation and stronger than its rules. Food and faith join here naturally. A filled stomach can help the spirit lift, and a lifted spirit can make plain food feel miraculous. There is also the relief of eating without secrecy. Ordinary survival on plantations often involves hiding, measuring, stretching, and worrying. A feast, even a small one, allows more open appetite. Take another spoonful, pass the bowl, tear off one more piece. That freedom, however brief, touches more than the stomach. It changes posture, tone, and breathing. The body stops guarding itself for a little while. Of course, the meal ends, the kettle's empty, bones remain. Ash settles around cooling coals, children droop with sleep. Women begin the familiar work of clearing, storing, and saving what can be saved. The night air grows cooler, and the smell of roasted meat fades into ordinary smoke. Nothing magical protects tomorrow from being hard again, yet this evening leaves a trace. It reminds people not only of what they lack, but of what shared food can create when circumstances permit. And that is why these rare fuller meals matter so much. They do not erase hunger, and they do not redeem the system that made them exceptional. But they offer relief to the body, yes, and something even more vital to the heart. They give children delight, elders honour, adults a brief unclenching of care, and communities a chance to gather around warmth, flavour, song, and faith. On a plantation where food is usually counted in anxious portions, a feast, however modest, becomes more than a meal. It becomes a pause in suffering and a reminder that people are meant for more than mere endurance. You feel it before anyone speaks of it. Hunger is not only an empty stomach, it is a heaviness in the limbs, a slow ache behind the eyes, a trembling that arrives when you stand too quickly, a strange coldness even in warm weather. On the plantation, limited food works its way into the whole body and then beyond the body into mood, memory, sleep, and strength. The fields may look still under the morning sun, but inside the people moving through them there is constant negotiation between labour demanded and fuel available. You wake before dawn in your imagination and sense the first truth immediately. The body does not feel restored. It feels interrupted. Sleep has passed, but the muscles remain sore, the mouth dry, the stomach already aware of its own uncertainty. Breakfast, if there is breakfast, may be simple and small. Cornmeal mush, leftover bread, a little broth, sometimes enough to steady the hands, sometimes barely enough to announce the day has begun. Then work calls. Work always calls. For a body asked to labour from first light until evening, limited food becomes a cruel arithmetic. Field work burns energy steadily. Hoeing, carrying, bending, chopping, picking, hauling, lifting, walking long distances. All of it asks for calories, salt, water, and recovery. If food falls short, the body compensates until it can no longer do so gracefully. Strength fades, endurance narrows, every movement costs more. The same row of crops feels longer at noon than it did last week, not because the field grew, but because the body has less left to spend. You can hear this depletion in breathing. The inhale becomes shallower, the exhale carries more fatigue. Someone pauses with hands on knees for just a moment longer than usual. Sweat dries to a salt crust on the skin, but salt lost through labour is not always replaced adequately. A worker straightens too fast and sees the light go strange around the edges. Another presses a hand to the side, not dramatically, just the quiet gesture of a body complaining in its own private language. Hunger rarely performs. It persists. The muscles are among the first to protest. Without enough food, power fades. Arms feel weaker, holding tools. Legs grow heavy after hours in wet fields or hard rows. The shoulders burn. The back tightens. There is less reserve for sudden effort, which is dangerous in a labour regime that punishes slowness. Enslavers often interpreted physical exhaustion as laziness or stubbornness because cruelty prefers moral judgments to biological facts. It is easier to blame a person than to admit you're underfeeding the labour force you depend on. The stomach itself has a life of its own under scarcity. It cramps, it growls, it goes hollow and then strangely numb. Sometimes hunger feels sharp, sometimes it feels dull and spreading, like weakness soaking through the middle of the body. A person may become so accustomed to mild hunger that fullness itself feels unfamiliar. Meals are eaten quickly, not only from habit or limited time, but because the body urges speed when nourishment appears. Then the meal ends, and the return of want can feel almost immediate. Children's bodies reveal these pressures clearly. Growth may slow, bellies may swell in ways that suggest poor nutritional worms. Arms and legs can remain thin while energy flickers unevenly between play, labour, and collapse. Illness becomes harder to fight. Historians and later medical observers have noted that enslaved children often bore visible signs of nutritional stress. Though the degree varied from place to place, a child needs more than survival calories. A child needs the raw material of development, and plantations rarely offered that generously. Elders experience hunger differently, but no less severely. The loss of appetite that comes with age can make eating harder, even when food is available. Teeth may be worn or missing, digestion may be sensitive. Hard bread and salted meat are not kindly foods to an old mouth or stomach. Weakness settles more quickly in older limbs, and recovery takes longer. A meal skipped or a ration reduced can tip an elder from fragile stability into genuine decline. Women carrying pregnancies or nursing infants face special burdens. Their bodies are already dividing resources between themselves and another life. Limited food in such circumstances can mean dizziness, depletion, low milk supply, increased weakness, and heightened vulnerability to illness. The archive often records births, sales, and labour assignments more readily than maternal hunger, but the biological reality is plain enough. Reproduction under slavery was not surrounded by tender care. It was squeezed into the same harsh food system as everything else. Then there are the cravings, which can become vivid under nutritional strain. The body begins to desire salt intensely, or fat, or sweetness, or just more of anything substantial. Smells become sharper because appetite is alert. A cooking pot 3 cabins away can dominate the mind. The sight of fruit on a tree, fish in a stream, or corn in a field can feel almost electric. Hunger organizes attention. It tells the eye what matters. It tells memory what to keep returning to. Memory itself may become unreliable under constant deprivation and fatigue, not in some grand dramatic collapse, but in the small fraying ways of an overworked body. A person forgets where something was placed. A child loses track of instructions. An elder pauses mid-story. A worker moves more slowly through tasks that require concentration. Modern people sometimes speak of being hangry after missing lunch, which is a charmingly polished word for a condition that in plantation life could last for years. Irritability is part of it, yes, but so are dullness, distraction, and a heavy mental fog. Sleep is touched too. You might imagine hunger makes sleep easy through sheer exhaustion, but that is not always so. An empty or unsettled stomach can wake a person in the night. Cramping, weakness, nursing infants, cold weather, and the anxiety of tomorrow's labour all interfere. The body does sleep eventually because it must, but not always deeply, and not always peacefully. Morning arrives before recovery feels complete. The cycle repeats. Limited food is not a single discomfort. It is a system of poor repair. The skin and face can reveal scarcity in quiet ways. Lips dry. Eyes seem duller. Cheekbones sharpen. Cuts heal slowly. The body guardedly chooses where to spend its resources, and beauty falls low on the list, though beauty persists in human beings anyway. Hair, nails, and posture can all show the strain of undernourishment. None of this may be visible in every person at every moment, because bodies vary and some people survive astonishing hardship with deceptive resilience. But over time, the pattern emerges. Disease takes fuller advantage where food is poor. A body lacking steady nourishment is less able to resist infection, recover from fever, or endure seasonal sickness. Plantation environments already expose people to parasites. Contaminated water, difficult weather, and exhausting labour. Add limited diets to that, and vulnerability deepens. Historians still debate exactly how much mortality in some regions can be attributed directly to food versus workload, disease ecology, housing, and medical neglect, because these factors overlap tightly. But the overlap itself is the point. Hunger weakens the body's defences and makes every other danger more dangerous. You notice how people adjust their behaviour to cope. They pace themselves where possible. They conserve motion during short breaks. They drink when they can. They choose soft foods over hard ones if the chance exists. They save bits of food for later. They sit close to warmth because weakness makes cold feel sharper. The body under scarcity becomes strategic. It learns to spend energy like money. A curious detail from her accounts of hard labour under poor diets is that some people developed astonishing sensitivity to small changes in food quality. A bit more grease in the pot, an extra sweet potato, fresher greens, or a spoonful of molasses could produce a palpable lift in mood and strength. This is not sentimentality. The body notices fuel with remarkable honesty. Give it something better and it responds almost immediately, like a lantern turned up a notch. Psychologically, constant hunger can shrink the horizon of thought. Large hopes become harder to entertain when the body keeps pulling the mind back to immediate need. Yet hunger can also sharpen cunning and determination. A person underfed may still plan, resist, love, joke, worship, and dream. The body suffers, but the person is never reduced to the body alone. That distinction matters. Physical deprivation shapes life profoundly, but it does not erase complexity. People remain witty, observant, irritable, generous, guarded, playful, fearful, and brave all at once. You can see this during the workday. One person grows quiet and inward when hungry. Another becomes short-tempered. Another cracks jokes that carry everyone an hour farther. Another drifts in thought while hands keep moving from habit. The same weak ration falls on different temperaments and different bodies. No single description captures all of them, but the common burden is unmistakable. Hunger is not evenly dramatic. Often it is simply always there, like background weather pressing against the skin. By evening, the body feels used up. Hands throb. Feet are sore or numb. The lower back aches with a heavy familiar ache. Even a short walk can feel longer after a day spent underfed. When food finally appears, the body leans toward it with a mixture of relief and urgency. Warmth spreads from the stomach outward. The mind clears slightly. Muscles unclench a little. It is temporary, but real. A humble meal can feel medicinal because, in a sense, it is. The plantation system depended on extracting labour from bodies that were not always properly sustained. That fact sits at the centre of everything. Hunger made people weaker, but it did not make them stop being human. They still pushed through fields, nursed children, tended gardens, fished creeks, prayed, laughed, traded, and told stories. The body suffered. Yes, but it also adapted with extraordinary stubbornness, and that is the harsh wonder of it. Limited food on plantations did not produce one single visible catastrophe every day. It produced something more relentless, ongoing weakness, blunted growth, slower healing, restless sleep, cravings that followed people like shadows, minds pulled repeatedly toward the next meal, muscles asked for more than they were given. Yet even inside that bodily strain, people kept moving, working, caring for one another, and finding ways to continue. The body bore the cost, and the body, somehow, also carried life forward. You stand in the quiet after supper and begin to understand that survival on a plantation is never just about enduring what is handed to you. It is also about knowing what to do with too little, knowing how to stretch it, hide it, improve it, share it, and gather more from the world around you. Knowledge becomes as necessary as food itself, not book knowledge in a schoolhouse sense, though that has its own power, but lived knowledge carried in the hands, tongue, memory, and nerves Under slavery, that knowledge feeds bodies. It also protects dignity. And sometimes, in small but unmistakable ways, it resists the very system designed to keep people hungry and dependent. You can feel this truth in the cabin before anyone names it. A woman saves seed in a folded scrap of cloth. A man knows where fish gather after heavy rain. A child can recognize edible berries from dangerous ones. An elder remembers how to soften bitter greens or store sweet potatoes so they last. Someone knows how much meal to use tonight so that a little remains for morning. Someone else knows which neighbour can be trusted with a loan of peas. None of this looks dramatic from a distance. Yet taken together, it forms a body of skill powerful enough to keep families alive in conditions meant to weaken them. The plantation tries to reduce people to labouring bodies and assigned rations. Knowledge quietly pushes back. It says you are more than what the ledger counts. You know things the owner does not know, or does not value properly. You know the creek better than he does. You know the garden's soil. You know which herbs ease pain, which roots can be eaten, which scraps can become broth, which season is best for trapping rabbit, which child is too thin, which elder needs softer food, which stretch of fence line hides blackberries. This is authority, even if the law refuses to call it that. The air tonight smells of damp earth and wood smoke. Crickets pulse beyond the cabins in a steady rhythm. Somewhere nearby, a pot is being rinsed with precious water. Somewhere else, a handful of seed is being tucked away for next season. You hear a low voice explaining something to a younger listener, not loudly, not ceremonially, just a simple transfer of fact from one life to another. Plant these deeper. Boil that longer. Do not eat those berries. Check the trap near the cedar tree. Save that grease. Cover the meal sack tighter. These instructions are ordinary, but ordinary is where survival lives. One of the great cruelties of slavery is that it tried to make every gain insecure. A garden could be trampled. A hunter could be punished. A traded good could be confiscated. A family could be separated. Yet knowledge travels more lightly than property. It can be carried in the mind when objects are lost. It can be taught in whispers, by gesture, by repetition, by watching. That is why it matters so much. It survives seizure better than almost anything else. You watch a grandmother show a child how to strip leaves from a stem. The child is impatient at first, then attentive. The grandmother's hands move slowly, the nails darkened by work, the knuckles enlarged with age. She explains which leaves go into the pot and which are too tough. This is food knowledge, yes, but it is also continuity. The plantation system aims to interrupt family lines, cultural memory, and stable inheritance. Every successful act of teaching answers that violence with persistence. Here is how you live. Here is what our people know. Here is how you keep going. Food knowledge also becomes resistance because it lessens dependence, even when only slightly. A garden means the ration is not the sole source of supper. Fishing means protein can come from water as well as from the smokehouse. Barter means the household can solve shortages through community rather than through pleading to an overseer. Preservation means a little extra today can soften hunger later. None of these acts overthrow slavery on their own. It would be foolish and unfair to demand that from them, but they do carve out practical space inside domination. They reduce vulnerability. They widen choice. And choice under slavery is never trivial. You begin to notice how the plantation's power depends partly on controlling scarcity. If the owner gives the food, he claims the right to define survival. But when enslaved people supplement, store, trade, and teach, they complicate that claim. They say, in effect, your ration is not the whole of our life. We will take what is necessary from land, season, skill, and one another. That is not freedom, but it is not full surrender either. There is a deep intelligence in the way households combine methods. A little meal from the ration, greens from the garden, fish from the creek, beans saved from summer, a pinch of salt borrowed from a neighbour, fat rendered and saved in a cup, wild fruit gathered in season. None alone is enough. Together they make a life possible. That combining of sources is itself a strategy. It spreads risk. If the garden fails, the creek may still provide. If rations run short, the neighbour may lend. If the meat is scarce, greens and beans must carry more of the load. This is systems thinking at the level of survival, built not in theory but in necessity. Historians often describe such practices as forms of agency, and that word is useful, though it can sound a bit pale beside the living reality. Agency here is not a grand declaration. It is a woman deciding how to divide sweet potatoes. It is a man setting a snare after dark. It is children learning where dewberries ripen. It is a grandmother choosing to save seed instead of cooking every last bean. Scholars still debate how far to emphasize resistance in daily acts of subsistence, because there is always a danger of making hardship sound nobly empowering. That would be wrong. Hunger was cruel. Constraint was brutal. Yet it is equally wrong to describe enslaved people as passive recipients of suffering. They acted constantly, intelligently, and with purpose to defend life. That defense of life can be moral as well as practical. Sharing food when everyone is hungry rejects the plantation's logic of pure extraction. Feeding an elder says human worth is not measured only by output. Making sure children eat says the future matters, even under terrible conditions. Teaching recipes, planting methods, and food cautions says memory matters. Gathering for a better meal with prayer and song says community matters. In all these ways, survival becomes an ethical practice. It protects not only bodies, but values. A curious and moving detail appears in many traditions formed under hardship. Recipes become less about exact measurements and more about judgment. A handful, a pinch, enough water to cover, cook until tender, save a little for tomorrow. This style of cooking is often dismissed by people who want fixed instructions and tidy printed certainty. But it reflects a world where ingredients change, quantities shift, and adaptation is more valuable than precision. The recipe lives in the cook, not on the page. That makes it resilient. It can travel, change, and survive. You can almost trace the map of survival through the cabin by smell alone. Cornmeal dry in its sack, smoke embedded in the walls, a little pork fat saved from an earlier meal, sweet potatoes earthy in a corner, greens just washed, their scent fresh and metallic with cold water, herbs hanging or tucked away. Each smell represents a decision, and each decision rests on remembered knowledge. The place is poor in goods, yet rich in technique. Knowledge also shapes courage. To forage safely requires confidence. To fish at night requires nerve. To negotiate a trade requires social skill. To hide food or save seed under constant threat requires discipline. People do not always feel brave while doing such things. Often they feel tired, cautious, annoyed, or simply determined. But determination is courage in work clothes. It has no need for speeches. There is another layer to this too. Foodways created under slavery do not disappear when the meal is over. They move forward through generations, shaping later black cooking in the South and beyond. Greens, cornbreads, beans, sweet potatoes, smoked seasonings, one-pot meals, careful thrift, layered flavors, all carry histories of adaptation and invention. Of course, these foods change over time and mingle with many influences. Nothing remains pure or frozen. Yet the knowledge forged under pressure leaves deep marks on American food culture, even when later generations are not always given full credit for it. That afterlife of knowledge is important because it means survival was not only immediate, it was cumulative. A technique learned on a plantation could nourish descendants. A seed-saving habit could continue. A taste for certain combinations could endure. A way of honoring elders through food, stretching ingredients, gathering for special meals, or trusting the pot to make something from almost nothing could outlive the people forced to rely on it first. Survival becomes heritage. Though never without the sorrow of remembering why the ingenuity was needed. You stand still for a moment and listen to the sounds settling around you. A night bird calls from the trees. Someone hums softly inside a cabin. The packed earth holds the day's warmth just a little longer before cooling fully. The stars above are distant and indifferent, but down here, in the human dark, care continues. A bowl is covered for morning. A crust is saved. A plant is checked. A child is told to remember. The whole plantation system tries to make people disposable. Their answer is to keep preserving life in all the small ways they can. That answer is not simple optimism. It is sharper than that. It is realism joined to persistence. People know the limits. They know a garden can fail. They know an owner can seize, punish, or deny. They know hunger can return tomorrow. Yet they plant anyway, fish anyway, share anyway, teach anyway. That repeated anyway may be one of the most powerful words in human history. It is the word of people who refuse to let oppression define the whole of what they are. So when you think about how black Americans survived with limited food on plantations in 1840, the truest answer is not a single ingredient or trick. It is a whole way of living attentively against deprivation. It is the knowledge of gardens, woods, creeks, pots, seasons, barter, preservation, childcare, elder care, and communal obligation. It is the refusal to waste. It is the will to teach. It is the discipline of planning under uncertainty. It is the moral choice to feed another person when your own hunger is still present. It is survival as craft, and beneath that craft there is quiet defiance. Not always visible, not always dramatic, but steady. Every fish caught outside the ration system, every seed saved beyond the owner's notice, every meal improved by gathered herbs, borrowed salt or stored grease, every child taught what plant can be eaten, every elder fed with tenderness, every neighbour helped through a lean week. These acts say that life will not be governed entirely from the big house, the ledger, or the whip. They say that knowledge belongs to the people who use it to keep one another alive. Now the night softens, the fire sinks lower and the cabin grows gentler around its edges. The smell of smoke is no longer harsh, only warm and familiar, settling into the wood, the blankets, the quiet hair of sleeping children. Outside, the insects keep their calm, steady music. A breeze passes through the cracks in the wall and cools the room just enough to soothe tired skin. Bowls are stacked. A spoon rests at last. The day, with all its strain and all its care, begins to loosen its grip. You let your thoughts grow softer too. You picture the garden leaves turning silver under moonlight. You picture the creek moving slowly through dark grass. You picture an iron pot breathing steam into the room, a grandmother's hand sorting seeds, a child learning the shape of a safe berry, a neighbour passing along a little meal with no need for many words. Everything becomes quieter now, slower, gentler. Not because history was gentle, but because even in hardship there were moments of stillness, and those moments carried people through. The body rests where it can. The mind settles where it can. A warm bowl, a saved crust, a covered pot for morning. These small things become enough for this hour. You do not need to hold all the sorrow at once. You can simply notice the tenderness that remained alive in the middle of want. A hand sharing food, a voice teaching, a fire kept going, a seed kept dry, a child fed first, an elder warmed near the hearth, and as the cabin quiets fully, you can let the sounds drift farther away. The crickets blur into one soft ribbon of sound. The breeze slips past and is gone. The coals dim from orange to red, from red to a hush of ash. The long day folds in on itself. Hunger, labour, smoke, memory, and care all settle into the same deep night. What remains is the steady human instinct to keep one another alive, gently, patiently, one meal at a time.